Hey guys, tonight we drift straight into a world of creaking floorboards, steaming kettles, and the kind of bone-deep domestic exhaustion that would make even the hardiest Victorian housewife look longingly at the nearest chaise longue like it's a life raft. You stand in the middle of a narrow hallway, present tense, inhaling the faint smell of coal dust and overboiled cabbage, and you feel the whole house humming with the kind of work that never, ever ends. This is the setting where the afternoon nap, yes, the one you occasionally defend like it's a religious rite, began to quietly form its roots. And honestly, you probably won't survive this without wanting to lie down yourself. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your location and your local time in the comments so I know exactly where in the world you're yawning from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into a Victorian parlor where everything seems to be made of dark wood, heavy drapery, and the deeply held belief that furniture should double as ankle-stubbing obstacles. The house is alive with quiet demands. A boiling kettle on the fire, a mountain of linens waiting for some unlucky soul, and a fresh delivery of coal dumped at the door like a passive-aggressive gift. You watch the lady of the house, shuffle from room to room in a long-day dress that feels like it weighs more than a toddler. One petticoat rustles, then another, then another. And yes, your lower back is whispering, please, stop. Victorian housework wasn't just busy work, it was an Olympic-level obstacle course, minus the medals or televised glory. A mainstream historical fact you'll want to tuck into your bonnet. Victorian households typically demanded 10 to 14 hours of daily domestic labor, even in middle-class homes, where a servant or two might help. Everything took longer, from ironing, done with literal chunks of heated metal, to cooking, an endurance match against temperamental stoves. Even laundering lace could swallow half a day. You continue pacing through the parlor, noticing how the windows are shut to keep out soot, which means the air inside is approximately as fresh as the inside of a bread box. By noon, you're sweaty, breathless, and mentally preparing the evening meal hours in advance. This is the moment where you start to understand how the first seeds of the afternoon nap were planted. Not as indulgence, but as survival. What begins as a short sit becomes a culturally neutral pause, slipped discreetly between tasks so no one mistakes you for being lazy. Historians still argue whether Victorian women truly believed they were taking rest or whether they were simply grabbing the closest thing to a micro-rebellion that society would allow. You lean against the wall, pretending you're simply inspecting a crack in the plaster, but really, you're letting gravity do the work of keeping you upright. From downstairs, a servant calls your name, and you respond with a polite, "Coming," even though your legs have staged a quiet protest. The floorboards creak as you move toward the stairway, passing a peculiar household item, the smelling salts bottle. You pick it up, turning it in your hand, admiring the ornate glasswork. Here comes your quirky tidbit. Victorian women famously used smelling salts, not because they were constantly swooning from fragile constitutions, but often because tight corsets limited their ability to breathe deeply, causing bouts of dizziness that would knock anyone off their feet. Sometimes fainting wasn't a delicate collapse. It was your lungs filing a complaint. You find yourself thinking that maybe, just maybe, a nap would solve most of your problems. But napping middle of the day wasn't exactly a respectable activity. You were supposed to maintain the never-ending illusion of domestic competence. The fragrant linens, the polished mantle, the children who were somehow supposed to look clean, despite living in an era where mud puddles were irresistible portals to chaos. And yet, the fatigue culture is everywhere around you. Magazines from the period described the constant battle against female wariness, advising everything from brisk walks in 3 petticoats, good luck, to vigorous rubbing of the temples with lavender water. You imagine yourself vigorously rubbing your temples, then immediately lying flat on the chaise longue for 45 minutes because lavender isn't magic. You pass the kitchen doorway and see a pot boiling violently, the lid rattling like it's trying to escape. You lift it, cautiously, feeling the blast of heat on your face. Victorian kitchens were notoriously punishing, often built in cramped, poorly ventilated cellars or at the back of the house where ventilation was an afterthought. You add vegetables, stir, and pretend you're not fantasizing about dropping the spoon, walking to the parlor, and collapsing face down onto an embroidered pillow. Your feet ache from standing on hard floors all morning. You glance at a nearby rocking chair, the Victorian equivalent of a massage chair, minus the electricity and plus the squeaking that could wake the dead. One gentle sway, and suddenly you feel the seductive tug of drowsiness. But of course, you snap awake because there's always something else to do. Laundry, dusting, childcare, sewing repairs, preparing tea, answering the door, managing servants, and ensuring the house looks presentable in case an unexpected visitor arrives and silently judges your worth based on the shine of your silverware. You drag your fingertips across a thick velvet curtain and feel dust cling to your skin. Dusting in this era is Sisyphean. Every passing horse-drawn carriage delivers a fresh sprinkle of soot into your home like free seasoning, charcoal-flavored. Victorian women spent an absurd amount of time wiping up particles they'd never win against. You imagine explaining to them that one day, people will complain about dusting even with vacuum cleaners and microfiber cloths. The thought comforts you. Misery truly loves company across centuries. But the true exhaustion sets in near midday, when the house is quiet, the worst chores have been battled, and your body hits that familiar slump. You look around the parlor and spot the single most beautiful object in existence, the fainting couch. Oh yes, the long curving seat placed strategically near a window so a woman could recover her senses, which, translated, means catch a blessed break. Your eyelids droop. You sit. Not fully, just halfway, so if anyone suddenly enters, you can claim you're resting the legs a moment. And then, without meaning to, your body sinks the remaining distance. The cushion exhales. You exhale, and now you hover in that delicious in-between state where consciousness wobbles like jelly. You're not napping. No, heaven forbid. You're simply practicing Victorian fatigue management. A passing carriage rattles outside. A child somewhere upstairs drops something heavy. A neighbor yells at his dog. And still, that soft cushion whispers something deeply persuasive. Stay. You think about how Victorian advice manuals treated women's rest with gentle suspicion. Too little rest made you frail. Too much rest made you morally soft. The ideal woman was apparently a self-recharging lighthouse, steady, glowing, and entirely powered by guilt and tea. But here, in this quiet midday pause, you feel the first thread of rebellion being woven. A moment when the housewife claims time for herself under the thin disguise of recuperation. A moment that will eventually evolve into the full-fledged afternoon nap. A ritual that centuries later you will defend as if it's a constitutional right. You let your gaze linger on the mantel clock ticking dutifully, every second a reminder of how much remains undone. And yet the longer you remain motionless, the more you feel your body demanding this rest. You aren't giving in, you're listening. That's what you tell yourself, and honestly, it works. Outside, the sky has drifted into that slightly hazy midday glow. You hear the low sound of the street vendors, the clip-clop of horses, the distant chatter of neighbors who have no idea that inside this heavily draped room, you are on the verge of inventing a small, private revolution. And revolution, of course, starts with the most forbidden luxury, stopping. You close your eyes for just a moment, just long enough for the room to blur into softness. And in that moment, without fully realizing it, without announcing anything, Without drafting a manifesto on lace-trimmed stationery, you begin the quiet evolution of a cultural habit that will travel through time. The afternoon nap is still decades away from being socially accepted. But here, in your exhaustion and stolen stillness, it's beginning. One breath, one sigh, one daring decision not to immediately stand up when someone calls your name. Your fingers relax, your shoulders sink, and for the first time all day, you simply exist. No task, no expectation, no performance. Just the rhythmic echo of your own breath, gently gathering itself for whatever comes next. You ease forward from that stolen moment of rest, drifting into the gentle clatter of porcelain as afternoon light settles across the dining room table. You're still in the same house, in the same dress that feels like it was designed by someone who hated joints. But now you're entering the sacred Victorian battleground known as after luncheon. And today, like countless days before, you discover the world-changing power of what I lovingly call tactical laziness. The art of pretending that sitting perfectly still with a teacup is an essential civic duty. You glide toward the table where the tea tray waits, steam curling upward like it's whispering, "Come on, you've earned this." You pick up the delicate cup, hold it just below your chin, and suddenly everything you do looks intentional and elegant, even though you are, quite literally, using it as camouflage for a micronap. Victorian women mastered this like ninjas in lace. If someone walked in, you weren't resting, you were taking tea, which was not only respectable, but practically patriotic. A little mainstream historical fact to sprinkle in your biscuit tin. Afternoon tea didn't become a widespread social ritual until the mid-1800s, thanks to Anna Russell, the Duchess of Bedford, who famously couldn't handle the long gap between lunch and dinner. She started inviting friends for tea and snacks, and soon half of polite society copied her like it was the latest TikTok trend. And tucked quietly beneath all that genteel sipping, an excuse for women to sit down, with zero judgment. You settle into your chair, lifting the cup with that slow, floaty motion that says, "I am absolutely awake," even though your eyelids feel heavier than the silver teapot. A warm breeze slips through the lace curtains. The spoon clinks. The swallow is soothing. The world softens at the edges. If someone asked how you're feeling, you'd tell them you're refreshing your energies, which is Victorian code for "I'm 2 seconds from dozing off if you stop talking." Historians still argue whether tea hour was genuinely social bonding time or simply the era's most cleverly engineered collective break disguised as etiquette. But you, sitting here, know the truth. For many women, this was the only sanctioned pause in a day, overflowing with coal dust, chores, and emotional labor before anyone had the phrase emotional labor. As you nibble a biscuit, dry, crumbly, a choking hazard unless paired with tea, you notice the most important part of the ritual, the pace. Everything is slow, deliberate, no rush. You pour the tea slowly, you stir slowly, you sip slowly. If someone speaks quickly, you blink at them like a confused cat until they match the room's vibe. This wasn't mere politeness. It was a system that allowed your weary brain to idle without anyone accusing you of sloth. Here comes your quirky tidbit. In some households, women developed a sly habit called the long steep. They'd intentionally brew the tea far too slowly, letting the leaves sit for ages, because the longer the steeping took, the longer they could sit without moving. Imagine explaining that to a family member today. "Sorry, can't do chores yet. My tea requires 18 minutes of spiritual reflection." You settle deeper into your chair, knees relaxing under the table, shoes pushed forward in the most discreet stretch imaginable. The house is unusually quiet. The children are outside. The servants are busy elsewhere. The doorbell has not rung. The universe has granted you a rare gift: silence. You let your gaze drift across the wallpaper. Layers of floral patterns that somehow look both soothing and aggressively loud. The mantel clock ticks, the light dims slightly as a cloud passes. And there it is again, that soft gravitational pull tugging at your spine, telling you that if you just lean back a little farther, but no, someone might walk in. So instead, you perfect the Victorian half nap. Eyes open just enough to function, mind drifting just enough to dream lightly. You're practically a magician, balancing consciousness on the tip of a teaspoon. Tea was the Trojan horse of rest, disguised leisure smuggled into the fortress of productivity expectations. And as you sit here savoring this tiny rebellion, you realize something. This is not laziness. This is strategy. Survival. A small but meaningful reclaiming of energy in a world that expected women to operate like self-winding clocks. One sip, one breath, one long, suspiciously prolonged moment of stillness. And maybe, just maybe, the afternoon nap is inching closer, disguised in steam and silence. You drift away from the tea table and glide back into the parlor, where the afternoon light has shifted into that soft, honey-colored glow that makes every piece of furniture look like it's posing for a melancholy oil painting. And here, right here, is where Victorian housewives perfected one of the era's greatest arts, couch diplomacy. You're not declaring war or negotiating peace treaties. You're negotiating something far more delicate. Your right to be horizontal for a few blessed minutes without anyone accusing you of moral decay. You step toward the fainting couch, your old friend. It curves like it was hand-carved by someone who understood the precise angle of exhaustion. You pretend you're merely rearranging a pillow, but really, you're assessing the landing zone. And with the same slow, cautious elegance of someone lowering themselves into a too-hot bath, you sink down. The cushion sighs, you sigh, and the room seems to lean in, whispering, "Just stay." Before you recline fully, you make sure the modesty screen is angled just right. Mainstream fact time. These folding screens were common in Victorian parlors, used to shield women from prying eyes while adjusting dresses, hiding clutter, or most importantly, resting in a socially acceptable way. You slide it an inch to the left. Perfect. Now anyone who walks in will see a tasteful panel of embroidered birds instead of your blissfully limp body. Historians still argue whether fainting couches were designed primarily for fashion or for the frequency with which women were keeling over from too tight corsets. But as you stretch your toes and wiggle them with quiet joy, you know what the real purpose was. Sanctioned, architecturally supported lounging. You lay your head back and let your shoulders melt. The room smells faintly of rosewater and coal smoke, Victorian aromatherapy at its most chaotic. The clock ticks. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, and slowly, your mind begins to float. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some women swore by the rest cure, a bizarre Victorian wellness trend that prescribed lying completely still for hours or even days to restore feminine nerves. Doctors actually told women not to read, not to think, not to talk. Just lie there like a sentient houseplant. You're not officially doing the rest cure, but honestly, you're not far off. Another 5 minutes on this couch, and you'd willingly photosynthesize. You shift slightly, adjusting the shawl over your lap. The softness is irresistible. You stretch a little farther, just a tiny, barely noticeable inch. You are a master of covert reclining. If Victorian society had medals for looking productive while actually doing nothing, you'd have a whole display case. But your mind wanders. You wonder if you should get up soon. There's laundry, mending, dinner prep, the never-ending cycle. And yet, your body refuses. The couch has claimed you. This is diplomacy, after all, a negotiation between duty and sanity. And right now, sanity is winning by a very comfortable margin. You hear footsteps in the hallway. Instinctively, you snap upright just enough to look present while still resting. Someone passes by, doesn't enter. You relax again, smooth, seamless, Oscar-worthy performance. Victorian housewives deserved awards. You close your eyes halfway, telling yourself it's just to relieve strain. But really, your brain has already put up the velvet ropes and dimmed the lights. You drift in that luxurious in-between state where you're aware of the world but blissfully detached from its responsibilities. The fainting couch is warm beneath you. The ticking clock becomes a lullaby. The gentle sway of the Modesty screen from a passing draft almost hypnotizes you. You imagine the screen whispering, "I've got you. No one will see. Rest." Another mainstream fact slips into your thoughts. Middle-class Victorian homes often featured heavy furniture, not just for decoration, but to signal stability and wealth. Everything solid, grounded, unmoving. Meanwhile, you're over here trying not to move at all, because the moment you stand up, someone will hand you a chore. Your fingers relax, your breathing slows, your mind begins to dissolve into soft, drifting shapes. You're not asleep, not officially, but you're definitely further from consciousness than you are from the laundry basket. And that, in its own quiet way, is revolutionary. Because here, hidden behind polite screens and cushioned upholstery, Victorian women carved out moments of peace in a world that insisted they should always be upright, bustling, and pleasantly exhausted. You're not breaking rules. You're bending them. Gently, artfully, persistently. And as your body sinks deeper into the couch's embrace, you realize something. The afternoon nap isn't just forming, it's blossoming. Every sigh, every stretch, every perfectly disguised semi-horizontal position is another step toward a future where resting in daylight won't raise eyebrows. You let your eyes drift fully closed now, trusting the screen, the silence, and the softness. Just a moment, you tell yourself. Just a breath. And the couch, ever diplomatic, holds you. You drift from the fainting couch with the slow, foggy determination of someone who has just negotiated a peace treaty with gravity. Your steps carry you toward the sitting room desk, where a scattered collection of pamphlets, advertisements, and household guides sits waiting. And this, right here, is where Victorian housewives stumbled into one of the most unintentionally comedic chapters in the history of rest: the pseudoscience of napping. You pick up a pamphlet with an elaborate title like "The Harmonious Regulation of Female Nerves Through Proper Quietude." Instantly, you sense the nonsense radiating from it like steam from an overworked kettle. You flip through the pages, and every line insists that the female brain is a fragile, humming contraption that must be reset with periodic stillness, like a clock needing to be wound. Mainstream historical fact for your mental scrapbook. By the late 19th century, Victorian Britain was obsessed with health fads, especially anything involving nerves, vapors, or vital energy. Medical journals, domestic guides, and advertisements were constantly pushing rest, fresh air, tonics, or nerve-toning powders, which, let's be honest, were probably just sugar mixed with vibes. You walk toward the window, opening it just enough to let in a mild breeze without letting in the soot storm outside. The pamphlet claims that women must lie down after luncheon to prevent an imbalance of nervous emanations. You blink at the phrase. Nervous. Emanations. You're not sure what those are, but you're fairly certain yours are already imbalanced simply from reading this sentence. Historians still argue whether these health fads were genuinely believed or mostly marketed to sell products and keep women quietly resting instead of expressing opinions in public. And as you skim another paragraph insisting that bad posture causes moral listlessness, you suspect it's a healthy mix of both. On the side table sits a glass bottle labeled Reviving Elixir. The liquid inside is a suspiciously cheerful shade of yellow. You lift it, swirl it, sniff it gently. It smells like someone mixed lemon, eucalyptus, and mild regret. The instruction sheet claims it can cure fatigue, nervousness, headaches, restlessness, and wandering thoughts, which in Victorian terms probably meant thinking about something other than chores. Here comes your quirky tidbit. One popular remedy of the time was called the electric belt, a device women were supposed to wear around the waist to stimulate energy using electromagnetic waves. In reality, it contained no electricity. None. Zero. It was literally just a belt with fancy stitching. Victorian snake oil at its finest. You settle into a chair and glance at the Household Medical Guide, a thick book full of questionable wisdom. It recommends quiet repose after moderate household exertion, which sounds suspiciously like take a nap but don't admit it. You love the phrasing. Repose. So tasteful, so proper, so clearly a nap in a bow tie. As you keep flipping pages, you find yet another claim. To keep your vital spirits from overheating, you must lie still on a firm surface for several minutes after any emotionally taxing moment, like distress, excitement, or seeing your neighbor's curtains and realizing they're nicer than yours. The book takes itself seriously, but you can't help being amused. Victorian remedies always sound like someone improvised medical advice after reading only the headings of a science book. Still, these pseudo-scientific rules were more than entertainment. They were permission slips. Quiet, printed permission slips that allowed women to rest without appearing idle. And you, sitting here with the sunlight warming your feet, feel oddly grateful that someone, somewhere, wrote, repose is essential to feminine balance. Because it lets you take a guilt-free break in 2025. Well, at least while we're pretending you're in 1884. You lean back in your chair, letting your head tilt until it rests against the carved wooden back. Your breathing slows, your shoulders settle. The room feels warmer, softer, more forgiving. You think about the morning, the chores, the tea, the couch diplomacy. And now, wrapped in this comforting web of Victorian wellness mythology, you let your body sink deeper into its quiet rhythm. The pseudoscience may be questionable, but the results are real. You're calmer, slower, drifting. A pamphlet flutters on the desk, caught by the breeze. You watch it sway and fall, its pages landing face up in a way that almost feels theatrical. The headline says, "Repose ensures refinement." You laugh quietly. Of course it does. And as you sit there, half awake, half floating, you realize Victorian women didn't wait for scientific accuracy. They accepted whatever explanation society offered, if it meant they could close their eyes without judgment. You close yours now, just for a second. Just a breath. Just long enough to feel the first true pulse of the afternoon nap forming inside you. This time backed by a stack of pamphlets insisting it's for your health, which is the best excuse humanity has ever invented. You rise from the chair with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who has just spent 20 minutes communing with the spirit realm of pseudoscience pamphlets. Your legs tingle, your shoulders loosen, and your mind drifts in that soft, dreamy haze that signals the final stage of Victorian rest evolution. The socially acceptable, fully horizontal, absolutely glorious afternoon nap. You wander toward the back room, the quietest space in the house. The floorboards here creak less, the curtains are thicker, and the sunlight slips in as muted gold instead of interrogation lamp white. This is the room where women stored seasonal linens, sewing supplies, and, ironically, their deepest desire to lie down without witnesses. You push the door open gently. A small cot, meant for servants or children, sits against the far wall. The mattress looks humble, but to you, in this moment, it might as well be the throne of England. You sit first, pretending you're testing its stability. Then your hand glides along the quilt. You lie back slowly, cautiously, like someone trying not to scare off a wild animal made entirely of restful intentions. The ceiling above you is painted a soft cream, cracked in places from humidity. You stare at it as your breathing evens out. For a moment you consider getting back up. There are tasks unfinished. Dinner isn't prepped. Sewing waits. The family expects things. But your body has staged another peaceful rebellion. And frankly, the union of your spine and this mattress is strong. Mainstream historical fact: by the late Victorian era, attitudes toward women's health were shifting, and rest was increasingly recommended by doctors, not just for nerves, but for physical recovery from endless domestic labor. Guides encouraged brief afternoon horizontality, which is just a fancy way of saying, lie down or you're going to drop. You exhale, letting every muscle sink. The household noise fades into background texture. Distant clinks from the kitchen, a wagon rolling outside, a neighbor calling to a child. Each sound grows softer, blurrier, less important. Then something delightful happens. You shift onto your side and pull the quilt halfway over your arm, and suddenly, effortlessly, you find the exact pose every Victorian woman perfected. The half-curled, fully cozy, nobody can judge me posture. This is the posture of revolution. Historians still argue whether Victorian naps were widespread or quietly frowned upon, but you know the truth, written not in dusty archives but in your own bones. The afternoon nap became unofficial policy because women everywhere decided to take it quietly, persistently, daily if possible. And honestly, that's how most social change happens. A quirky tidbit arrives as your mind drifts. Some women claim the best naps came after reading religious tracts because the dense prose encouraged contemplative stillness. Translation: the texts were so dry they practically knocked you out. And as you lie here now, you can believe it. Even thinking about them makes your eyelids heavier. You shift again, just a tiny adjustment, and the pillow beneath your head shapes itself perfectly. The quilt warms your arm. Your breath deepens. The cozy silence wraps around you like a soft shawl. Your thoughts begin to float, gentle and disjointed. You're not fully awake, not fully asleep. You're in that delicious liminal space where the world softens, where duties fade, where your mind finally stops narrating your to-do list like a hyperactive stage manager. And in that hazy stillness, you realize the truth Victorian housewives discovered long before sleep scientists confirmed it. Rest isn't laziness. It's fuel. It's survival. It's sanity. It's the invisible backbone of a life that demands far more than it admits. You curl deeper under the quilt, letting your hand relax. The room is warm. Your eyelids flutter. Your breath steadies. You aren't hiding. You aren't shirking. You aren't weak. You are recharging, quietly inventing a ritual that will travel centuries, becoming the universal symbol of I need 5 minutes or I will simply fall apart. And in that small, soft back room with the afternoon sun beginning to dim, you settle into the first true Victorian afternoon nap. Not disguised, not justified, just lived. A silent, gentle victory. And now, as your breathing slows into an easy, natural rhythm, let the atmosphere soften even further around you. The room dims, the corners blur, and every sound that once tugged at your attention drifts away like fading ripples on a quiet pond. You feel the weight of your body sinking, melting into whatever surface is holding you right now: bed, couch, pillow, or simply the stillness of your own imagination. Let your thoughts loosen. Let them drift without direction, like dust motes turning lazily in a sunbeam. Nothing is urgent here. Nothing is waiting for you. Even the Victorian world you've been wandering through begins to dissolve at the edges, its ticking clocks and rustling skirts fading into a warm, velvety hush. Your breath deepens again, slow and smooth, each inhale a gentle wave, and each exhale a soft release. The weight in your shoulders unravels, your jaw unclenches, the space between your eyebrows relaxes until it feels wide and airy, and your hands, whether they rest on fabric, on a pillow, or loosely at your sides, grow still and effortless. Picture the fainting couch, the tea tray, the quiet back room where the nap finally bloomed. All of it softens into a haze now, becoming less like a memory and more like a cloud you're floating through. There's nothing you need to do next. No steps, no instructions, just this warm, drifting ease. Let the hush settle in fully now, like a blanket being pulled gently up to your chin, like the last whisper of daylight slipping through a curtain, like the distant thrum of a fan or breeze humming you toward sleep. You're safe, you're calm, you're sinking beautifully. Rest now.